So in the final couple of minutes, I mean, just could you actually tell us, I think it's related, it's a little off topic, but the state of like pushing to reopen the New York schools and basically how people feel about it and, the safety of those affected?
Yeah. So that is a big major conversation that's underway. The city has a bunch of different task force, sector advisory councils that are advising the city on different aspects of reopening. There's one for schools. There has to be at least 40 or 50 people on the one for schools. And there's like advocates and education leaders, higher education leaders, all sorts of individuals on it. They've had a couple meetings. There's been a lot of interesting developments on that recently. I mean, basically, the city says that it's considering a variety of options. It could be, plexiglass barriers. It could be there may be some form of remote learning because there's kind of a mixture of responses from families. Some families are like, well, even if schools reopen in September, I'm not sending my kid because it's not going to be safe. Other families are like, oh, well, I need my kid to be in person or else I can't go back to work. So there may be a mixture of in-person and then there's also the factor of like class size has to be limited. Some schools are overcrowded. There are a lot of different options that are being considered, but I think people are kind of, putting pressure on the city and saying, we don't want what happened with the whole situation around the closing of the schools for remote learning. We don't want to see a repeat of that. There was a feeling that the school system should have been closed sooner, although some were saying, well, a lot of kids rely on these schools for basic needs. So I think there's definitely a lot that's underway. I think the chancellor had at that town hall that I was listening to yesterday, he was saying that, well, they want to be guided by health expert decisions and guidance, and they want to be, anything can happen between now and September, so they kind of want to be careful and just look at the different varying needs. I think they put out a survey to hear from families. So there's a lot of different things to balance. And I know that UFT is involved with that as well, because there's a question of teachers and how they're going to be paid. And so there's definitely a lot that's underway. But I know that there's a lot of anxiety because different families have different situations. And like even another teacher I spoke to was just like, well, for those of us who have big schools, like large classes, like how are we going to do this? So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
Final question. I mean, I'm obviously with my politics very concerned about, Bill Gates and Eric Schmidt and all of that sort of Andrew Cuomo stuff that he's talking about in terms of the education system as a whole. Has there been, on the other hand, any thought that when you see these problems arise, like kids can't get food because the schools are shut down because of a pandemic, or there isn't the same access to technology if there's remote learning, has there been any sense of, just more broadly, like when you have such a limited social safety net, the burden that falls on the schools, and some thinking of like, hey, if we're going to have, proper preparedness, there has to be, as an example, like other ways to get food to people and taking care of kids. Has there been any thought in that direction?
Yeah, that's actually something that someone I had spoken with someone from an immigrant advocacy group who had mentioned that like this question of accommodating families who have those needs, and even things like after school and working with community-based organizations. I'm not sure what the city has determined yet in that particular area, but I do think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about. Is like when schools reopen, like the city is going to have to come up with some alternatives to address those needs and maybe team up with certain organizations to deal with that.
Madina Touré, I really appreciate your time. As always, follow all of Madina's work
Thank
at
you so much
Politico.
for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right. Take care. Be well. You just watched a Michael Brooks Show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.